We're all basically made of the same stuff. Generosity and selfishness. Goodness and greed. Madeline M. Kunin. This video was briefly adapted from a research paper for an English class. I attempted to format it and informalize it in such a way that it was more fit for a general public and YouTube audience, while bringing in a few other pieces of information to fully piece together the video as best as possible. It uses many different sources, including websites, official psychology and therapy books, old psychology textbooks, and other scholarly videos and articles. This is the final product. From the jerk who wants to kick the back of your seat in the movies to your arch nemesis in the workplace, there are always people who seem to get joy out of other people's suffering. Schadenfreude. This is an emotion that one gets out of the pleasure of others' discomfort, and is often seen as selfish behavior. These behaviors and identities all fall under the idea of Machiavellian. In 1513, Machiavelli focused on and analyzed the power of rulers within their respective country, which led to his most famous pieces of literature ever, The Prince. Machiavelli is noted as saying that rulers should actively take and force their power in whatever way they can, even when it can harm others. This mindset, he stated, would be best for the kingdom and that the selfish means would justify the ends. This political and philosophical belief led to the definition of selfishness within our modern world, and opened the door for many to export this thought process to different fields of study, even going as far as Shakespeare using the term Machiavel to describe someone with selfish and destructive attitudes. Going back to our example of jerks in your life, they all represent the idea of the Machiavel trait, unless of course you are the jerk. This trait was stated to exist from the human soul and by nature, which brought one main question into thought that could be dated back to the dawn of time and the very beginnings of philosophy. Are humans naturally selfish? It's hard to answer this deep philosophical question when I simply just dropped it on you like a 150-pound weight on an untrained and out-of-shape man. But who cares, right? What is the point of asking this question? Does it even matter if we dwell on some meaningless thought experiment? Who cares? I'm talking about it anyways. But I will say that it's important to understand that this question appears in your life more often than you think. For example, politics. Many people talk about the true intentions of leaders and whether they are selfish. Recently, research done by psychologists and neuroscientists have shown that politicians, and to an extent all citizens, views are driven by self-interest and that one's brain subconsciously blocks out this fact by trying to locate different sources of justification known as cognitive dissonance. This makes sense as a large part of our views are created by our experiences, which engenders an egocentric wall around many of our own beliefs due to us naturally closing off to keep you from contradicting ourselves. Perhaps a better example would be you justifying keeping that one toxic friend in your life purely because you cannot imagine life without them, and you slowly try to convince yourself that their actions have positive influences around you. Despite all of the signs pointing towards this friend being a hindrance in your life, you still feel obligated to prove that they have good in them, eager to forgive and forget. A cruel game of cognitive dissonance. Selfishness not only shows itself in politics, but also your social life. However, the question even makes its way into law and criminal psychology. What causes criminals to break the law, and what can we do to stop this? A large root of the problem lies in self-interest, and this is where the truth about selfishness begins to completely unravel. You see, many people driven by pure self-interest can be erroneously written off as nefarious. But there are others who have been forced to perform criminal activities for the survival of themselves or their family. A man tasked to steal for the sake of giving to the poor, or perhaps a man who was attempting to save his son by keeping away corrupt doctors from killing him. Self-interest is still present. Even if their causes are justified, their actions are selfish by nature. Many people have this flawed concept that selfishness is bad, and this furthers the idea that perhaps selfishness is not reserved in a bad connotation, and can be understandable depending on what values a person holds true. The connotation of this word belies the true understanding that we get from our world. It could seem that nothing is axiomatic and that, in a relative sense, good and evil simply don't exist. But selfishness is also important in our idea of our very own introspection. Many of you have probably seen articles declaring the importance of self-care, a trend to taking care of ourselves through positivity and healthy therapeutic actions. Self-care is defined as any activity that we do deliberately in order to take care of our mental, emotional, and physical health. By Orthelia Michael, and is said to help the relationship of the inner self by using the outer self. However, it should be noted that these actions are still under the definition of selfish, as the acts in question are being performed under the notion that it will directly benefit ourselves. With the expanded beliefs in the philosophy of self-care, it is important in finding out what truly is the idea of selfishness. If you were tasked with killing others to save yourself, would you do it? Even better, if your friend's life is on the line, would you kill others to save them? It would be selfish to take other people out of their lives just to keep this one person in yours. This thought experiment provides a quick glance at the true nature of why others may be selfish. Many would say they would sacrifice themselves or others for the greater good. But in the moment, would that truly be the case? What would someone more religious do? Does religion make us less selfish? Is there a true set of morals? Selfishness is so deeply ingrained that it affects our morals to a T, influencing everything from the psychology of our choices to religious beliefs on death. But we will expand upon these topics of morals a tad bit later in the video, not right now. Knowing that the core question of are humans selfish revolves around everyone's daily lives is important in understanding if we truly know ourselves. If the origin of selfishness was to ever be found, then both a new revolution of inner psychoanalysis and a rethinking of how we are involved in our communities would truly begin. Keeping this in mind, let us take a deeper exploration into the mind of those who display true Machiavellian values, and try to figure out what makes us humans tick, and why it's important. Let us start off with a brief run-through of the history of selfishness. Anyone who knows their way around the debate usually tends to gravitate towards and cite John Locke and Thomas Hobbes. John Locke was a firm believer that we were all born with good, logical intentions and that eventually mankind will come together to choose the morally and logically correct path. However, Thomas Hobbes, an epitome of the antithesis of Locke's beliefs, concluded that we, at our core, were evil and inundated with eternal avarice and a desire to have our needs completely fulfilled. Hobbes would commonly point towards current and past wars as proof of this theory. One of the main things Hobbes pointed out at the time was the corruption of the draconian Catholic Church. The Crusades, for example, were started for many reasons, but many point to a major factor being due to the fact that the Church wanted to have fuel to unite their people to be able to control them more easily, so that they could have higher tithes and more taxes. This slowly forming ethical war between Hobbes and Locke would further itself into the conceptualizations of modern philosophy and psychology. Similar to the wars currently happening within Hobbes' times, he described the socio-political state of society as a battle between all to achieve their eternal desires, and is a constant form of war that is against all that produces a condition in which all are solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hey, direct words from him, not me. Basically, he believed that since everyone, including you and me, have different goals, we would naturally have to create actions that would cause the other harm to get what we truly wanted. This directly contrasted the later teachings of Locke, who believed that purest form of man was the complete opposite of war, and was striving towards equity and peace for all. These socio-ethical ideas would leak their way and eventually poison each philosopher's political stance when they approached the power. Hobbes believed that for chaos to be contained, absolute authority and power must be established and that citizens must obey the command of their superiors or it would breed dissent and ultimately civil war. Locke, similar to his own beliefs, disagreed and stated that government should be created on the foundation of the consent of the governed, a political view that would evolve into the modern depiction of democracy. With the stage being set by Locke and Hobbes, human nature would soon spread from philosophical disputes to political turmoil in less than a few years. But if you think that they were the only ones to talk about it, you're dead wrong. The debate would later devolve in so many ways because of the number of people attempting to cite their own experiences and opinions, especially due to the political catalyst on the questioning of democracy. However, a larger reworking of the entire argument would not come until 1848, with the rise of Karl Marx and his creation of the Communist Manifesto. Let's set the stage. The Russian uprising is about to come, and the middle class believes that they deserve the means of production, and that the upper class should distribute their goods and wealth accordingly. This famous Russian Revolution was inspired by Karl Marx and his ideology. Within many of his books, Marx decided human nature as having the primary goal of individual satisfaction. But he also identified that the secondary goal of humans is to get satisfaction helping others as well, a deeply rooted philosophy within communism and socialism. As such, Karl Marx believed in human nature that achieves satisfaction through helping others, and themselves by supporting a united system through logical processes and ideas, very similar to the united humanity theory that Locke first proposed. A few years later, in 1856, Sigmund Freud would begin his work on a newly crafted field of psychoanalysis, where he laid out the fundamentals of the human drive. He came to the conclusion that humans are driven by three main characteristics: eros, a strive for living out to the fullest; thanatos, which is a strive for destruction; and libido, a strive for sexual desire. He believed that humans' purpose in life is driven by these three principles, and therefore our very nature is to live out our own selfish desires via destructive tendencies. Another revelation in the mysterious nature of humans appeared in 1972 after George R. Price devised a mathematical relation between a specific genetic trait and the fitness of that trait in the environment. FYI, the genetic fitness is how well a gene is passed on from the parents to the offspring. While I love math, the biometric equation is rather complicated and not the main point of the essay. What I am trying to convey is a simple idea that most people know to be the basis for the concept of natural selection. The basic meaning of the formula is understood to represent that any trait that tends to increase the genetic fitness and variance in a population will be more present in offsprings. With a little bit of researching and statistical testing, his formula concluded to be true as shown by this figure. If one were to draw a regression line, also known as the line of best fit, they would see a positive correlation between the increase in trait value to fitness. But what does any of this mean, and why is it important to our debate? He applied many different theories, such as game theory, to this new concept and was able to hypothesize that the equation showed the existence of altruism in the evolution in animals. This was hypothesized as if animals could make altruistic gestures, they could increase the genetic fitness of their population. He said that the closer the animals are in relation to genes, such as family members, the more likely they will commit altruistic acts. For example, many people may know that animals give out warning signals by creating certain noises to warn other animals of nearby predators. While this does decrease the survival of the one making the alarm call, it increases the chances of others with their genes to pass on their DNA. This also extends to the idea of Hamiltonian spite, which is used by animals to keep others within their species out of gene pools either by killing their infants, known as infanticide, or causing other harmful processes to them. This is used to ensure that their genes are passed down rather than others. As such, altruism does not exactly equate to being contradictory to natural selection, and by the same point, it does not prove altruism in nature either. Due to the help of many of these foundational historical figures and concepts, the debacle made its way into popular culture among many non-professionals, such as myself. Many believe that the basis of the argument relies on the nurture versus nature argument, which examines if one's traits are more affected by genetics or by the environment. Now that it's made its way into daily life and mainstream media, the debate will grow even stronger, especially since the rise of politics has become more important and how the government can use its power for national, self-based projects versus global projects that can benefit the entirety of humanity. With the frameworks being inspired by the leading giants of philosophy, Hobbes and Locke, many views of self-interest, the realms of sociology, political psychology, and even daily life would forever be shifted into our age of thinking, causing the debate to form into its current state of divided beliefs. Diving into the belief that humans are naturally selfish, John Locke's idea of tabula rasa, or blank slates, can be used in favor of actually furthering this belief. One of Locke's psychological analyses expands further on this. Let us then suppose the mind to be, as we say, white paper void of all characters, without any ideas. How comes it to be furnished? Whence comes it by that vast store which the busy and boundless fancy of men has painted on it, with an almost endless variety? Whence has it all the materials of reason and knowledge? To this I answer in one word, from experience. This basically means that we have a certain amount of built-in information, such as breathing and eating, while the rest of our slate is completely blank, allowing for the environment to cause personal change. While this seems to be saying that humans become selfish from experience because a human is socially blank, you can argue otherwise. A study performed on Americans recently has shown that when people are urged to work together for a task or are prompted to be more accepting of other views, those same people become less persistent in the goal. Due to the lack of self-gain within the task, the people become less persistent to help. This idea was tested by putting people in either mentally demanding tasks, such as complex word puzzles that required a team to come up with answers, or physically Herculean trials, such as gripping handlebars to teammates for the longest period of time. The results pointed towards people losing both determination and the mindset to try hard, as the tasks seemed to profit for them less and less. This furthers the concept that perhaps we only complete tasks because it benefits us, which is a prime example of our selfishness. Furthermore, this extended to multiple nationalities, and not just Americans. If many people are showing signs of being selfish despite totally different environmental conditions due to countries, can it be inferred that selfishness is then an innate trait that is built into the paper itself rather than the ink, or knowledge that one continues to build over their lifetime? I mean, even disregarding this evidence, it should be noted that we are constantly conditioned by society and interactions, which may stifle humans' true innate selfishness. In an experimental study done by Professor Neil Miller, who was an experimental psychologist from the 60s, and his team, they created a 2-room testing site where they gathered monkeys and sent shocks through them as they broadcasted the pain expression of the monkey's face to the other monkey, and was labeled as the executive monkey experiment. If the other monkey could not recognize the expression, it would be shocked too. Most monkeys learned quickly through the pain expressions and had a cognitive awareness of facial expressions, as well as an increased heart rate. Except for a group of monkeys who were socially isolated at birth that could not recognize the emotion and had no increase in heart rate. Due to the fact that only monkeys who grew up in a socially thriving area grew to care about others, it can be inferred that the monkey's environment is what changed the selfishness to actual concern for other monkeys. If the monkey was isolated, this would be considered a control group, and could mean that the tendencies that we call selfish are actually built in, and only changed by the environment itself rather than being caused by it. Furthermore, many mammals have been recorded outright stealing food from weaker animals. Animals have also been shown to create social hierarchies which attempt to put the stronger ones in position for the protection of that animal's own life, such as many wolves creating packs where the alpha is on top, or where bees assign roles to other bees such as workers or Gamergate ants. Not only that, serotonin has been shown to drive many of these behaviors as well as other selfish tendencies in mammals and even crustaceans. All of these actions are derived from the simple principle that animals strive to live and pass on their genes. And many of our actions as people could be similar in concept. Even if we may have the ability to evolve past primitive mindsets, does that mean that the fundamental principles of biology can no longer apply to us? Let us switch to the more hypothetical side of the debate. Psychological hedonism, a mindset created since the beginning of time but later supported by many of Hobbes' beliefs, is defined as a philosophy that man is bound to seek personal pleasure and to avoid unpleasurable situations. These actions are for self-preservation, as it is the first law of nature. This makes sense after all. No one would willingly put themselves in uncomfortable situations without anything to gain from it. It seems rather illogical too. One of the main supporting factors of psychological hedonism is the psychology of ego involvement in human motivation. By shifting the idea of the group to the involvement of someone else, it can convince them to become involved. Take, for example, one of the most popular patriotic phrases in American history. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. This phrase shifts the involvement over to us, the people, the citizens, as we begin to feel a personal obligation to unite a cause for the country. By relating a non-emotional and unrelated event to a you word, the writer automatically gains the attention of the person. The idea can be further established with other linguistic cues, such as the word we, meaning different things in different contexts. For example, saying, "we need to get our crap together," implies that you need to get your crap together. However, if you were to switch it out for what's called the royal we, also known as, and sorry for me butchering this, pluralis magistratus, it changes the meaning of the sentence entirely. For example, in the sentence, "we do not take kindly to that here," being used by a boss, the we implies everyone. But really, the person is only referring to themselves. They spread their importance into the beings of others in these psycho-linguistic cues, meaning that even our subconscious may have underlying signs of selfishness. Overall, many people who support the idea of nature creating selfishness in humans will usually point towards statistics and trends within humans in work environments, the biological and psychological preferences in other animals, and even the linguistic and philosophical manipulations among ourselves as a whole. Perhaps you aren't swayed by the idea of nature completely defining us as a person, or maybe even you are on the fence and want to see what the other side can offer. There are many people in our world who believe that we are largely affected by the environment and the people within it more than our genetics. Knowing this, you could argue that while humans are indeed selfish, they learn this by replicating their environment, and others rather than being born with a desire to perform selfish acts from innateness. The Neolithic era, with the creation of systematic agriculture and the establishment of a hunter-gatherer system like tribe, saw one of the very first times that humans outside of their close family tree had attempted to help each other. This expanded the idea of tribes into a societal and political game, and therefore was one of the very first, albeit archaic, forms of politics. Due to this innovation of the political system of altruistic nature, we would now be focused on creating societies and cultures which would expand the growth of our enlightening ideas and other advanced ways of thinking. As such, this could be considered the first time that true altruism exists within a species of animals. While it seems that the act of joining a tribe would be selfish because you were only doing it to prolong yourself, the larger picture of this idea is that we were brought together to create synergy between ourselves that would later focus on the good of the whole group rather than just that of us. Moreover, studies have shown that small groups with altruistic attitudes will likely outcompete those with more people who are selfish. Therefore, the power of determination and optimism in terms of being altruistic towards others can lead to better cooperation between others. Knowing this could be thought of as the turning point of selfishness into a collaborative and effective process of helping as many as we can, and as such, it could have very well destroyed the innateness of selfishness within us. In our modern world, society depicts headlines of national heroes who attempted to risk their lives to save others. Would this act be present in a human that is innately selfish? Critics of this idea would argue that people who save lives merely do it for the fame, due to the outlook that the media and humanity create and the social luxuries, such as fame or reputation, that come with doing heroic acts, known as a moral desert. However, there are things to note, such as the fact that reward is not necessarily the entirety of the story. When 3 to 5-year-old kids were rewarded for helping someone the first time, they were statistically less likely to help the second time. Not only that, it is important to know that humans have a cost and benefit scale for weighing decisions. Risking one's own life to save another person should automatically tip the scale in favor of not helping, as the main goal in life is, according to biology and game theory, to survive. In layman's terms, is it really worth dying to get fame? This could hint towards the idea that there is another element, another variable within the brain that helped establish the decision and move the scale towards helping. Altruism. Yet, it is important to realize that this is in direct contrast to how babies appeared to cry deliberately to get their mother's attention, which questions the validity of weighing benefits and presents it as an impulsive and selfish decision instead. However, if altruism does indeed exist within humans, it might break the definition of selfishness being an innate trait, as it had been overwritten even though the trait supposedly is underlying within our genetics. However, the science of changing our genes with pure willpower is an ongoing mystery of its own, and not the point of this video. An existence of altruism also exists within the gray matter of the brain, the amygdala. You may have heard this word when talking about psychology or neurology, as it is somewhat the mysterious part of the brain that produces fear and socio or psychopathic tendencies. Moreover, the amygdala is a section of the brain responsible for fear analysis, sympathetic reactions, like fight or flight, and creating empathy. It can also reach from analyzing and creating the perception of emotions, ranging from anger, sadness, happiness, and much more. Behavioral psychologist Abigail Marsh expands on the true role of the amygdala in altruistic decisions, and notes that psychopaths, people who are considered to be genetically devoid of empathy and indulge themselves in selfish behaviors, have a smaller amygdala that is less responsive in terms of activity within the neural synapses. This basically means that they receive less activity or drive towards fear and altruism, meaning they are less likely to show these traits. Although, people who commonly participate in selfless behaviors tend to have the opposite brain, one that could recognize fear better, create more emotional responses to situations, and hold more empathetic and altruistic behaviors. Using this, an empathy continuum was created, in which psychopaths were at the lower end of the spectrum, while philanthropists and all-around good people were at the higher end. This showed that a healthy amygdala actually holds a large amount of capacity for empathy from birth. You could infer that this means that humans are actually philanthropic by nature, but as people have less functioning brains, they become more likely to partake in selfish activities. Largely, the psychology and history of past civilizations of humans have revealed that altruism exists somewhere within the human mind and the creations of humans. As humans become more willing to risk their lives for others, society gets closer to unraveling the mystery of who we are as a species and how philanthropy plays a bigger role within it. With an active idea of teams being able to synergize to beat non-functioning and selfish teams, it is not too far-fetched to believe that we had the capacity and potential to become morally good. With the idea of capacity in mind, it is then up to scientists to determine if this breaks the true fundamental ideas of genetics, which may hint towards the existence of goodness at birth. With the main two sides out of the way, I want to now give a rebuttal of sorts and be able to clear the air of any misconceptions that may arise when looking at the topic or even words of warning when contemplating my information from previously in the video. Look, as much as it pains to say it and as much as it might shock you, I'm human. And I will admit that covering a topic with such brevity will open up a debate that is too much for me to handle, and as such, there will be many errors in this video. This part of the video is to help show that I'm not completely certain in my stance either, and this debate is largely more nuanced than a black or white stance on morality. It's important for us to first understand that connotation plays a large role in the debate's path of guidance. When people ask the question of, are humans selfish, they typically are referring to acts that would cause a person to gain the upper hand within a situation. However, even the simplest acts, despite being mutually beneficial to others or not, can be selfish in nature, as discussed with self-care earlier in the video. The self-preservation that we have built in us, such as the cries of a baby in need of milk, is a purely selfish act meant to help us survive. How we define the idea of selfishness plays a large role in how the argument is shaped and what exactly can be pointed to as a selfish behavior. Furthermore, selfishness could be defined using a moral compass, but it begs the question of, is there a true set of morals? A question that is greatly emphasized by Hobbes because of his beliefs that morals change depending on how they allow us to access our goals of self-interest. Due to the lack of clarity within the broad topic, the question itself may raise complications in how it is interpreted among individuals, which may make the topic opinionated in some areas. It should also be mentioned that there is a noticeable difference between the potential of goodness and selfishness versus the innateness of those traits. You may have the capacity to perform a certain action, but the acumen with which the action is done is largely dependent on the environment and the actions that you take to train the skill. As such, I could be built with the capacity of selfishness, yet never truly display this trait due to how my surroundings have affected me. This calls into question what it truly means to have a trait be innate. Is a trait innate when it is built into us from birth, not necessarily affecting us at all? Or when it is constantly impeding our every decision that we make? This question creates another layer of ambiguity to the argument at hand. Alright, let's say that even if the arguments over the connotation of this debate are not important, there are still many complications within the ideas and facts that arise within the actual substance of the debate on human nature. One of the first hurdles of the research in general, which questions the legitimacy of many arguments, comes from the idea that experiments using test animals can fully and precisely predict the behavior and traits of humans. In 2011, the National Institute of Health discharged over 90% of chimpanzees for testing after research from the Institute of Medicine concluded that they were unreliable in biomedical research. Despite sharing 98% of their gene markers of humans, their medical and psychological makeups are completely different from us, which further raises the credibility of other animals that have even fewer similarities with us. Do any of the experiments based on animals' psychological makeups have any validity in the argument? I cannot give you the straight answer. Additionally, another common type of argument over the creation of selfish and altruistic actions relies on the fundamental idea that we all use an internal scale to balance our beliefs, as established in the nurture argument. However, this couldn't possibly even be further from the truth. Contrary to common belief, most, but not all, of the decisions humans create come from a sudden impulse rather than a rationalization of the issue and weighing the costs and benefits. In fact, many humans create decisions based on goals that are only subconsciously developed. If this is true, our selfish and altruistic acts are caused by a spur-of-the-moment decisions and innate behaviors, which means that we are naturally bonded to one of these. This grants a moral paradox. Can we possibly be both inherently selfish and altruistic? This paradox is furthered by one of the most grossly misunderstood mental conditions of all time: narcissism. The American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as DSM-5, defines narcissistic personality disorder as a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, a constant need for admiration, and a lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts. In many people affected by NPD, it does not appear until adolescence, but is seated in the mind as a child and can even come from genetic or neurological causes. If this disorder can be obtained genetically, it can hint that some selfishness is innate, and it proves that humans can be devoid of any altruism genetically. However, at the same time, it could be argued that since narcissism is a corruption on what is a healthy human brain, it is not a true source of innateness or origin. If something truly is a corruption, then it is the falsified and untrue version of what is the original product, or in this case, the human brain. If narcissism is a corruption, then the opposite of it is the idea of altruism existing as a birthplace within ourselves. Even with all of this evidence regarded, it is hard to decide which one is the origin, as both take place from different views. In fact, it could be stated that there is no true right brain, but rather two sides of a coin, the common complication that arises when anyone addresses mental disorders. Comprehensively, it should be known that the existence of such altercations of the mind suggests the idea of a complex web of paradoxical sides to the human ego, resulting in a messy analysis of human nature as a whole. Altogether, the ambiguous connotations and the paradoxical nature of the argument causes complications to emerge and can even shift the argument into a more opinionated one. With the contradictions having a larger chance to arise, it is important that we approach the idea in a careful and concise manner. Look, I realize that this essay is getting rather pedantic and long. At this point, I'm essentially splitting hairs, but I want to summarize the main point of why this video and discussion are important. Selfishness ultimately is a cause behind many humans' motives: politicians, criminals, businesses, and even you as a person. To understand human nature is a way to connect and logically understand the rationale between the way people think and weigh their decisions. By solving this human enigma, humanity can strive to be more altruistic in nature, or at the very least strive towards more beneficial behaviors for the sake of all involved. It affects every single one of us down to the last person, and using the philosophical examination of human nature allows us to accurately find many solutions to problems dealing with the supposed selfish nature of humans. Laws for the lawless. It was an idea that could be dated back to the Bible, where it addressed the idea that the concepts of laws were created for those who do not follow them rather than the truly just. Many tend to point blame at politicians, countercultures, or even society itself for the problems with a weakly bonded community. But it all boils down to the placement of those who are selfish. The selfish create a community in which trust in others is deemed insufficient and skepticism reigns supreme. However, as mentioned previously before, it is important to keep in mind that morals are relative to the person and time period that rapidly evolves with society. Many of the modern morals we have now were reinforced and emphasized by Germanic and European laws as well as the Bible, with the occasional Neolithic and Mesopotamian influences such as the eventual Code of Hammurabi. In saying that, the interpretation of selfishness within this video is merely a basis of the perspective of this modern time period's views of social interaction, morals, and patterns in cognitive human behavior. By no means should it be said that being selfish is bad from the fundamental laws of the universe. Our very concept of the truth relies on our experiences within reality, resulting in the paradoxical cycle of never being able to confirm the truths of reality in the philosophy of Hegelianism. But that is a different video entirely. The entirety of philosophy and morals could be felicitously summed up as a two-sided coin, but in reality is a multi-sided dice. Our views were created by the chance of our evolution in past our societies, until created exactly as it is now. It is one of many different morals that could have become commonplace within our society. This is known as a Sartrean view of reality, where you begin to understand that the concepts and ideas that our society has created are ridiculous. Many call it the absurdity of life. Of course, there is no true way to measure good or evil, or a way to quantify it, but yet we still use it as a description of the ideal mental condition of a human. The same is true for selfishness. As such, selfishness is merely an attribute or variable loosely described from the lens of our own society's opinion over how we should act. It becomes so vague that the connotation of the word no longer accurately helps you gauge what an action represents in society. Meaning of the word becomes lost as you expand upon it. Overall, the widely discussed debate of human nature is deeply rooted in the philosophy of morality, the psychology of the brain, and the aspects of human anatomy. As more and more people begin to incorporate their experience into the argument, the debate becomes even deeper in complexity. However, the philosophical conundrum seems to have no end in sight, but it provides us with an example of subjectivity being debated throughout the ages. In the end, the fate of both of our community and the state of our true nature lies within our hands in creating healthy habits. I now leave you, the viewer, to answer two main questions that this video should have already presented you now that you have adequate information available. Are humans innately selfish within their behaviors and morality? Is there really such a thing as selfishness, or is it rather an idea set by a negation of our concepts of morality? In the end, I feel like this debate could be boiled down to subjectivity, but I wanted to bring this up so we could have a little nice discussion over it and maybe a debate, and have you expand your horizons and broaden them by hearing other points of view, and I would love to hear your views and expressions in the comments below. And I really did enjoy making this video. It was probably my most fun one to make, and it took me a while, but I'm finally glad I got it out there. And I thank all of you for watching, and if you do want to see more content like this, I would like for you to subscribe, and maybe I can make more content like this in the future, and I hope to see you guys next time.